'76, the tail end of a hurricane came through during the last season, hit the Connecticut coast. It started coming inshore, okay? And so the very last session of the season that I was there in '76, we heard the forecast, and we literally took all of the shutters and put all of the shutters on the lodge and brought all of the kids down on the very last night that they were in camp. The very last night that we had kids, that I was there for kids in camp, the hurricane came through. The tail end of the hurricane came through.
Wow.
Did a lot of tree damage, not trees down, but branches and stuff like that. But thankfully everything was safe, and it actually passed over us. But I mean, it tattered. We left the flag up by mistake, and the next morning there were only ribbons of it left.
Wow.
So that was a little bit of excitement. Beth was probably one of the best parts of my career. The whole thing of her then in 1975 coming for probably the entire season, and in '76 coming for the entire season, and watching her development during that time period, and watching her love for camp grow to the point where it is today. Okay, to be able to go on to camp director, the idea that that you can circumvent anything that nature throws at you. Being a diminutive height didn't stop her from being the camp director of the camp that she absolutely loved, and it was her home, and it was her solitude place, kind of thing, a place that, to a certain extent, because of the love that just that is in those hills and has been there for years upon years upon years, made her feel real comfortable and wanting to be able to return to people the same thing that she got. The funniest story was we drilled, and so then another well was drilled, and that well was drilled just about 50 yards down the road from the existing well house at that point, toward the council ring on that road that goes down to the council ring.
Yep.
And it was drilled right in the middle of it, and it was drilled in the fall, okay? And when they drilled it, they just capped it, and with the idea that we would go back in and put a submersible pump in it in the spring. Well, one of Bob Gaddis's work weekends was to do that, and so Pappy came up, and we got there on an early Friday afternoon. Went and found the wellhead that had been capped. Pappy looked at it and said everything's fine. And what was pretty amazing is that the well had actually become artesian. There was water coming out of the well cap, which was really surprising to all of us for the elevation that it was above the lake and the whole thing. So we thought we probably had a really good well at that point.
Yeah.
We went to bed Friday night, woke up the next morning to 14 inches of snow on the ground. So there was a classic picture of me. One of the things you have to do with the new well is make sure how deep it is, and what you do is you drop a weight on a string down and then and measure the length of the string so that you don't put your pump right on the bottom of the well. Okay.
Sure.
Got it. And the only thing we had was I had taken my fishing rod with me, and so they got a picture of me in the middle of the woods with trees all around, with my fishing rod draped over this 6-inch hole in the ground. Trying to be able to figure out how deep this hole was, kind of thing. But in '75, there was a brother and sister that worked. The brother was probably like a CIT. The sister was a cabin counselor by the name of Susan Pelham, I think. And it was so funny because the program director, who was fairly young at that point, probably just a year out of college, and she was probably just going into college or something. But they just absolutely fell in love during the course of the summer, but were smart enough not to be able to tell anybody about it. And Chris was just a real up and standing guy. He was actually the person who created created the tradition of a lot of the camp songs. He was absolutely fantastic guitarist, and so at campfires he would play all of the Cat Stevens stuff and have the kids singing, and that's where a lot of that stuff started with Chris Holt, both as a program director, and he had been there as a camper and as a senior Well, my favorite time, other than with the kids, the first week, and the last day of camp, I would go up after the last kid left. I went up on the ball field and I would just scream um, because the summer was over. And then, even though I enjoyed everything during the course of the summer, but the week after, I would take vacation from the Y the week after Labor Day, and just stay at camp. And it was the most amazing time because it went from all of the noise back to all of the quietness. And it was a neat way to be able to just sort of mellow out after the summer and be able to get onto my job back at the Poughkeepsie Y for the wintertime. To me, it was a unique time period in history. You know, kids, were different. Staff were different. You know, the hippiedom was still going on. The Vietnam War was just ending. American decision to be able to join anything at that point in time because it was a unique time in American history, and it was a unique time in YMCA resident camp. It was going through its metamorphosis from small to big camps and things like that, and yeah, and there were enough poignant moments at camp to be able to remember. I remember. 73, the first teen camp that I was at, and supposedly responsible for, but Steve Smith did a great job in working with that, and there was another volunteer that actually sort of ran it. But the very last night they did a banquet, and the theme for that banquet was Stairway to Heaven.
Okay.
And they took the entire day and decorated the dining hall to the point, Mike, where they had taken a rowboat and stuck it in one of the windows on the lakeside and created a fountain. It was just absolutely amazing.
Wow.
And so to this day, every time I hear the song Stairway to Heaven, and all through it, I just remember that whole week's experiences that culminating in that banquet. It just absolutely amazed me.
Oh, that's funny.
Teenagers be able to put out the effort that they did for one another. And like I said, from that, I got 5 or 6 of them that lived right around the Poughkeepsie Y to be able to spend almost every Saturday working as volunteers in Saturday program for me.
It's nice to see that it's you see it back then, so that you see it today. You know, it's just that thing. It just doesn't change. It's great.
Well, it doesn't. It has, but the opportunities to be able to influence life are there. I think that what ends up happening now, Mike, is, as most old people will tell you, is that kids today just have so much more competing for their time.
Yeah.
The neat thing about Segowea is it gave kids, even at that point, even though the technology wasn't there, there was a lot competing for kids' time. It gave kids a chance to be able to slow down and make friendships, and to be able to learn about life. Instead of necessarily being entertained, they figured out ways that they could be entertained by their own making. And I and my wife were actually at camp probably the week. When was the last? We were there like September 25th or something like that. We dropped in for the day, wandered around. Looks absolutely wonderful. The work that has happened in the last year just absolutely looks great. The cabins look better than they ever have.
Yeah.
The new steps and porches on them just absolutely wonderful, and were needed 35 years ago. I'm glad for safety's sake that they're there now. The beacon looks wonderful. The work that's been done on the Keller Lodge looks great. The work that Norma's talking about happening on the hotel is wonderful. But camp absolutely looked wonderful. Absolutely looked wonderful. I see lots of faces. I worked after that. I've left Poughkeepsie, went to Harrisburg, went from Harrisburg to Fort Worth, and then from Fort Worth went back to Connecticut, and then from Connecticut went back to Houston. Because Segowea was my first professional position, I think it probably has probably plays more prominent role in my mind of what I remember. But I remember remember more people and names from those 3.5 years that I was there than probably any other Y that I'd worked at. And so it was the physical beauty, the 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 isolation, uh, just bringing a group of what potentially were strangers into a group of people who weren't strangers, and the acceptance. The campers from the previous years, the veterans accepting the new ones and helping them, and the staff that had been in previous years accepting new staff. It was a really unique time period for a 22 that ended up leaving as a 25-year-old working in Y work. And so I remember the people. Kids need to be able to attend resident camp. Segowea being one of those. The smaller resident camps like Segowea are really, really neat because they become more personal and you get to know everybody and the allegiance is there. But resident camp and YMCA resident camp is probably the first chance for kids in a protected society to be able to try out their independence. And to be able to, I think the kids learn more in a resident camp experience in 1 week than they would in 6 months any other place about life and interaction and how to be able to make friends and how to be able to build spirit, mind, and body.